John Lewis, U.S. Congressman and all-time civil rights activist, tells a story that came from his childhood. It's a story that he uses to introduce his book that describes some of the activities and the dreams and the accomplishments of the civil rights movement, in which he was a pivotal figure. John came to age in the 1950s in Alabama, and he became one of the leaders in the civil rights movement. And the story he tells is the introduction to his book, Walking in the Wind. I highly recommend it. He tells the story of when he was a small child, and he and 14 of his cousins were playing in the dirt front yard of his Aunt Seneva's house when a storm started to develop. He describes the increasing development of the clouds as they began to get dark, and occasional flashes of lightning and thunder. And John was scared of thunder and lightning. When it happened, when he was at home, his mother would always hold him tight and tell him that was God at work. But his mother wasn't with him that afternoon. And so as the storm got closer, then the children got more and more frightened. And Aunt Seneva got them all in her little one-room house. And about that time the storm hit, and John describes the lightning and the thunder and the howling wind and the rain. It's the wind he remembers more than anything else, I think. And Aunt Seneva and the children were huddled together in the middle of that one room when they noticed that one corner of the house was beginning to rise. And John remembered thinking that the wind is going to suck the house up with us in it and take us away. Aunt Seneva got all the children to hold hands, and they walked toward the corner that was rising up. And the weight of their trembling little bodies was sufficient to hold that corner down. And then another corner of the house started to rise, and they did the same thing. And they walked from corner to corner as the unstable house began to shake and tremble. And gradually the storm subsided, and the weight of their little bodies was enough to keep the house from tearing up. John uses this story to introduce his book called Walking with the Wind, because he says our society today is much like little children holding hands together while the storm threatens to destroy the house. He says that the genius of the civil rights movement was that people of conscience stayed in the house and helped stabilize it. And he calls for that in our society today. We have new storms. The old ones are not gone yet, but we have new storms rising. We're in the middle of them right now, and I don't think I need to delineate those. You know what they are. But it's the principle that John is relating to us in his story that I think is applicable today. We must be the little children, scared though we might be, willing to hold hands and move toward the corner that seems to be the most unstable. We all have our storms, individually as well as collectively, literally as well as figuratively. I was in a storm when I was 10 years old in a tornado, and I remember it well. We were living in South Alabama at the time. My mother and I were living with my grandfather for a short time. And I can remember my grandfather coming in the house running and yelling to my mother to come help him. And Mother and I joined him at the door, trying to hold the door to the breezeway closed. At about that time, the tornado touched down in the front yard. And when it rose up, it took the walls and the roof of the house with it. And I can remember looking up and seeing debris and limbs flying overhead. It was a scary time. But I think the storms, the other storms that I have been aware of or faced since then have been much scarier. And the ones we face today have its own fright, its own fear. That will continue to happen. But as the storms subside, as others rise, we are called upon, I think, as people of conscience, to stay in the house, to hold hands together, to move toward the corner that seems to be the most unstable, and do our best to stabilize it. We may not be able to do any more than that, but we cannot afford to do any less. It's a good story. It's a true story. And I think it has a truth for us in our day. It impressed me, and I hope it's a story that you will find some meaning for yourself. And I thank you once again for listening.